Hey everybody, Derick Van Ness here from Big Life Financial, and we're live today. And we're going to be talking about the anatomy of an acquisition. I know that's a fancy name, but the bottom line is we're going to be discussing what does it really look like to buy a business, right? I know there's a lot of questions out there as we work with people on doing mergers and acquisitions, aka buying businesses. Like, what does that really look like? What am I getting myself into? Most people haven't bought a business before. Maybe you've started one because primarily most of the people here are business owners. But that second location can be a little scary, right? And so I brought in my partner here, Rob Williams, and you can see Rob's credentials here as I click through the slides. But he's been doing this a long time, and he's going to give us a real insider's look into what to expect. How does this whole thing go? We're going to go A to Z, and we're really going to talk about what you can expect, as you close the deal and as you sort of start to take over, because that for a lot of people is the scary part. So we're really excited about that. And the reality is we're going to be covering how to find it, fund it, what it looks like to go through that. We are going to be doing a giveaway at the end because a lot of people ask us, what kind of business should I buy? Or how do I know if I'm buying the right business, right? And so we've actually got a really cool tool. It's called the Target Acquisition Criteria Checklist, right? We call it a TAC, so I couldn't spit the words out. But the Target Acquisition Criteria Checklist is really going to take you through, ask you the questions so that you can get super crystal clear on exactly what the right deal looks like for you. And so we're going to give that away at the end. So you're going to want to stick around for that. But today we're really going to dig into Rob's expertise. So Rob, I appreciate you taking a little bit of time today to be here with us.
Thank you, Derick. It's always my pleasure to be here and talk about mergers and acquisitions. And I'm really excited to cover this process. Everybody attending will in some way be thinking about mergers and acquisitions as a reason for whether they want to grow their existing business, whether they just see it as a pathway to wealth. Maybe they see it as freedom. We all know if we can buy businesses that operate without our involvement, it creates profit. That means that we're free to go and do other things. Some people will be here just because they want a new project. It's exciting, buying businesses. It's really great. And when you do it properly, it becomes a hobby as much as it does a commercial interest. So whatever the reason is, we want to be able to explain today how to do an acquisition in a way that gives you confidence that it is something that you could do right away, or something that you could do if you spend a bit of time learning a little bit more about it. That technical knowledge is within your grasp. It's not out of your reach. And I think it's important to talk about why we're here as well in terms of this process that I see people go through, because this is very different from when I was sat in boardrooms and we're talking about big roll-ups, 500 million plus deals. This is very different. We're talking about, I think, 1 to 3 million, maybe 5 at a push, where people might be thinking about doing their first acquisition, and because that feels that it's within reach. So initially, we have awareness, don't we? It's like when you're thinking about buying a new car. Everywhere you look, you see the car that you're thinking about buying. And it's the same with mergers and acquisitions. Suddenly, it's popping up on your Facebook feed, the LinkedIn posts that you're reading, the conversations that you're having at the business conferences. People are talking about acquisitions as being a really good thing to consider as part of a business growth strategy. Then the next thing, we're into attention. So we're now looking for it. We're seeking it out. Maybe our Google search is starting to talk about mergers and acquisitions, or our YouTube search, and we're going on Amazon and looking for books. And that's attention. We're paying attention to what's going on in the market, but we might still be figuring out if it's right for me or not. And then we get to intention. And this is where we are actually spending time looking for information, attending webinars like this. So I'm guessing that most people here are going to be at the intention stage. This is something I really like the idea of. I've played around with it in my mind. I've maybe been reading things on and off, maybe for as long as a year, but it's something that I really want to learn about because I think it is a feasible way for me to be able to achieve that ambition of freedom or wealth or growing my business or the interesting project or even leaving a legacy for my family. And then once we get through this stage, we get into focus. And this is where we start looking at our schedule, and we're actually carving out time to go and do things, to write letters to businesses, attend events, join courses and programs. And then we get into action, which is where a particular part of my growth strategy as a business owner is mergers and acquisitions, or 5 nights a week I'm spending contacting business owners, or I've commissioned somebody to go and find businesses for me to buy. So that's how I see this kind of level of awareness and focus and interest in mergers and acquisitions. So if you're at the intention stage, then welcome everybody. The tool that Derick talked about earlier is exactly what you need to be able to kind of figure out the type of business that you want to buy, because it's at that first stage that a lot of people make mistakes. But firstly, I would say most people here will have successfully built or operated a business. So that means that people will already have an understanding of cost structures, customers, and how to build great teams. But the idea of acquiring one is probably something new. Okay, so you might have started a business, but you haven't acquired one yet. And that's what we're going to cover today. But before we get into frameworks and funding structures and what to do when you own the business and get into operations, I think it's really important to say that M&A is not a universal strategy. And we all have opinions about what we see. And I would never look to kind of, bad mouth other people that are, sharing M&A information. But I think the idea that people who have got no business experience can go out there and identify a business and get a deal for no money down and run that business effectively with zero risk with no business experience is highly unlikely. It's not impossible, but it's highly unlikely. So I think mergers and acquisitions for me, it's for owners who already have some operational experience. It's for individuals that have some stability in their personal income, I would say, or access to capital. And I think it's for those who are looking to grow by buying infrastructure. They're not looking to build it from scratch. And you need to be capable of leading a business because there's going to be a transition phase. Again, there is this utopian or romantic view that there are businesses out there that run without any kind of intervention from the ownership, that we can just buy, get 250,000 cash flow after the debt coverage, and we don't even need to spend a minute in that business. Again, it's a romantic view. It's not impossible. It's not binary. But the probability of you finding something like that without you needing to be involved or facing some issues, I think is very unlikely. So mergers and acquisitions isn't for first-time entrepreneurs who have no operational experience, in my opinion. I don't think it's a get-rich-quick scheme. I don't think if you're in financial distress, thinking about buying a business is a reasonable way out of that. I think, again, it's not impossible, but it's unlikely. And I think you're more likely to increase your financial distress if you're in that situation. And I think you do have to have some tolerance for risk as well. And again, we hear about flipping businesses in the same way that people have flipped houses for decades. It can happen, but you do need a certain amount of skill and time to be able to do that properly. So, you don't need an MBA or an investment banking background. And a lot of people see that as a barrier to getting involved in mergers and acquisitions. And I wouldn't necessarily say that, but judgment, discipline, experience, confidence in running a business is an absolute must. So if you know operations, you know how to lead people, you're financially literate, you know P&Ls and you know profit and loss statements and you know balance sheets, and you know that you can make good decisions by applying resources with an understanding of how those resources, when they're leveraged, can deliver an outcome, then I would say mergers and acquisitions is probably a really good opportunity for you to achieve any of those outcomes that I spoke about at the beginning of the session.
Okay, so let me jump in here and just point out for those of you watching this, can you see that Rob's not just giving you a sales pitch here? He's not saying, hey, you can walk in with 2 nickels, rubbing them together, buy a business that's going to make you rich overnight and you never have to do it. You just sit home and watch Netflix in your underwear and the money shows up, right? The reason I chose Rob and the reason that I want to work with Rob and the reason that we've partnered up on this is because Rob brings real world experience and he's not going to sugarcoat it for you. He's going to tell you, what does it really look like? And that's the promise we're making, is to be honest with you guys about this, right? And the one side of the honesty is, hey, it takes work and it takes a skill set. And the reason that you're here is most of you who are on here are already business owners. So you probably have a lot of these skills. You just didn't realize you can apply them and create this kind of wealth. And we want to open your eyes to that possibility. And at the same time, we want to show you what to expect and what kind of work it really comes from. And so I say all this to say, Rob's going to give you the real deal here. And I don't want you to take that for granted, because most of the stuff you see, they give you best case scenario. It's like I flipped almost 300 houses. And yes, did I buy some houses for no money down or even get paid to buy them and make a big profit? Sure. But that was like 6 out of 300, right? The other 294 work the way that they're supposed to work. And that's really what we're going to be talking about here. So like Rob said, if you stumbled into just the right deal at just the right time in the perfect situation, could it happen? Sure. But that's not really what you want to build a business on. That's looking for a lottery ticket. So in this case, we're looking at what does it really look like to do this in a systematic way where you can win consistently and really build wealth. And if you're interested in that and you're serious about that, make sure you've got your journal with you. I always have mine here, and that you're taking notes, because you're going to get the real dirt here. So with that, I'll flip it back to you, Rob, but I just think it's important that people get what you're talking about is reality, not fantasy.
Yeah, and I'll give you a kind of a current status of reality. So if I go back 12 months, and 2 of the projects that I'm working on started 12 months ago, I would say that in partnership with others, we've been spending somewhere between 10 to 15 hours a week over the last 12 months, right the way from figuring out what our ideal deal criteria is through to close. Now, one of those partners is in auto repair shops, and we're just about to close on the first, and we've got another one that we're going through due diligence on. So to give you an indication, we've spent that amount of time over 12 months. There's probably been it's a range, I would say, you would need to look at, of about 150,000 to 350,000 over that 12 months. That would include investment in some of those tools and resources, and also a down payment to acquire the business. So there is a kind of a monetary contribution that I think is necessary, and that's often why being a business owner is a huge advantage. But after debt coverage, those businesses will give an annual contribution together of 650,000 a year. So that gives you an indication immediately of what the payoff is. That's not to say the 650,000 goes in your pocket, because there's a good chance you're going to need to keep more in the business for working capital, or see opportunities to be able to invest, to even, be able to leverage that even faster and turn that 300,000 in one deal into 400,000 the following year. But there's about $1 million of EBITDA in those businesses when we look at over the next 5-6 years, cost consolidation, increase in revenue, and paying down that debt. Okay, so the upsides are definitely there, but I just want people to know it doesn't come immediately. There's a little bit of pain, but it's worth it. If you get through that time period, you follow the process and move through. One of the challenges has been finding the right business to buy, and we'll come to that in a minute. But that's really, really key. So I just want to get emphasis. It will take time, it will take capital, and you will need some cash runway just to protect yourself against unexpected contingencies.
Love it. Well, keep us going here, Rob. So we've kind of got the breakdown here, and I think you've covered some of this. But
yeah, I covered that.
Sorry, I got a new fancy mouse, and apparently it was automatically doing the slides for us here.
Oh
I'm not
wow!
sure
Well, look at
why.
that. This isn't AI,
Yeah.
is it, Derek? That's kind of taking it to new levels. It's
No,
actually
no.
interpreting your brain.
This is just user error. All
Derek, I'm
right.
going to ignore this
So
and I'm going to carry on. So it's really important that we operate with a high level structure. And I think any acquisition, whether it's in the boardroom looking at a 500 million roll up or whether it's your first $1.5 million valuation acquisition, we go through 5 phases. We find a business, we figure out how to fund it, we carry out the checks and balances to make sure it meets our requirements, and we're looking at where the risks are and we're confident we can mitigate them. Then we go through a legal process and due diligence. We close on that deal, and then it's all down to running it. So I don't think this is a checklist, it's a sequence. So each of these phases addresses a specific decision set, and when it's done well, it reduces the risk and the effort of the one that follows. Yeah, and that's why it's important that we kind of do this. And if you're acquiring your first business, there's one mistake that trumps everything, and it's thinking you can figure it out as you go. Don't do that. If you do that, the likelihood of problems, dare I say failure, is going to be far higher. But, I can understand why people do that, because business owners, especially entrepreneurs, they're resourceful and there is a high level of confidence. You rely on instinct and you can make things up on the fly. And I imagine if you look back at the successful business that you've built, a lot of the time that does work. But buying a business is not the same as starting one. You don't get that level of optionality. So I think it's really important to remember that. And I can take you through so many pitfalls. I know we're kind of quite limited on time, so I don't want to go into too much detail, but there are many mistakes that you can make in each of these different phases that I'm going to touch on, that hopefully you'll think, gotcha. They're the things that I need to avoid. And even just coming on this webinar and taking note of those things, it's built my confidence and given me even more conviction that this is something that I actually able to do.
Awesome. You want to jump into the first one here, Rob?
Yeah. So let's go into find. Now, Derick and I have done 4 or 5 of these webinars, and I would urge you to go onto YouTube or a link that Derick's going to share to be able to watch them, because we go into tons and tons of detail around each of these different phases. We give you examples of roll-ups that we've done that you can follow that pathway and see, which are really interesting. And again, if you're in that sort of awareness, attention, intention phase, this is going to be education that you're going to want to lap up and think about, well, how can I apply that in my own deals? But if we go to find, this is a pathway that you can follow. So what I'm saying here would be a typical deal that for your first acquisition would be a really, really great checklist to measure yourself against. So within find, it's all about identifying acquirable, durable businesses that align with your operational capacity. Okay. So this is why the tool that Derick is going to share at the end of this session is so important, because you can't just go into the market blind. There are 3 things that I believe are the highest priority for any acquisition. The first is cash flow. Can you buy a business, and after you've covered the debt, is it going to deliver profitability? I always ask myself is, well, how long would it take me to grow my own business to add another 250,000 EBITDA on the bottom line? God knows I've been doing it for 8 years and it still hasn't happened. And there'll be a lot of people out there that will be saying that. My God, I've been stuck in this kind of 10, 15% swing for the last 5 years. I'm stuck. How do I get out of being stuck? And you get out of being stuck by acquiring cash flow. So yes, acquire cash flow, really, really good option for you, particularly if you can get that long-term debt arrangement. The second reason I would acquire business is because of market. I know that by acquiring that business, they've already got customers that I could sell my products or services to, or they've got the customers that it would cost me a lot of money and a lot of trial and error in a marketing strategy to be able to go and try and win them or steal them from my competitor. And the other is capability. And by capability, it might mean adding products and services into my own offering, or it could be a brilliant sales team, a great marketing capability, amazing AI. You know, it's something that business has got, that they've advanced ahead of you, that you know that you could integrate into your company, and you would save money, or you would massively enhance your ability to get into market and win customers. There are other drivers, but for me, they're the three drivers that I've adopted for 25 years, and they've always stood me in good stead. Now, have I bought businesses just for cash flow? Absolutely. Yeah. But if you can find cash flow, market, and capability in the territory that we're talking about, that size business, then that's your real win. But we also need to ask ourselves, what capability and experience do I have? Is it in the right location? You know, again, I've looked at businesses and I've sat with partners and we've been on Google Maps and we're exploring it, and I can see their faces change. They're looking at where it is and they're like, "Ugh." And I see it and I say, this is a non-starter. If you're looking like that, just by thinking about visiting them, you don't want to be an owner of that business. Yeah, I'm sure in time you're going to be able to find a manager to take it on. But, you know, if you make that face, you know, this needs to be love at first sight. Any kind of friction like that, forget about it. So location's really important. The amount of time that you're prepared to spend in the business, given your family responsibilities or responsibilities to your current business, again, really, really important. And we often have, again, this romantic ideal of the turnkey business, which does exist. But, you know, is there a day-to-day manager on site that means that you don't need to be there, making sure that the staff are doing everything that they need to be, running morning meetings, dealing with low, mid-level queries? Yeah. So these are all categories around finding businesses. And there's another category as well. And we often talk about, we don't really want to buy distressed businesses. That's not, for what we're talking about, a good acquisition. But an owner that wants to get out of the business is often good. So if it's a good business, but the owner is feeling fatigued, there might be stuff going on in their life. You know, we call it the 5 Ds: death, disability, disruption, divorce, and disability. That means they want to get rid of that business as quickly as possible because there's something about it that they just can't stay in there any longer. They can't see this full-time role existing. And that gives you real leverage in terms of how much you pay up front. You know, this is where you do get a good seller financing opportunity, and also the flexibility with the deal structure. So these are all categories that I would consider when we're talking about find. Also in find, I would talk about prioritizing volume before selectivity. You know, I think with the two examples that I've given, I think with the health company, we've looked at about 60 deals over a year to end up with 2. And on the auto side, I think it's even more. I think we looked at it before, 95 deals we've gone through. So that means that we don't get this thing called deal heat, where no matter what happens, we want to do that deal because we're excited to do our first acquisition, but there's nothing else coming up the track. So it's like, you know, I don't care. I wanted 300 cash flow, but I'm prepared to settle for 150 after debt because I just want to get this first deal done. I think we have to be stoic and we have to keep control of our emotions. And one way of being able to do that is, hey, the world is abundant. We've got a load of other deals that we can look at. We don't need to make a rash decision going outside our kind of what we would call an investment thesis, the criteria or category of deal that we'd be looking at. Also, hey, Rob, durability. Sorry, go on, Derick.
I was going to say, I think this is a really critical point because I see this a lot as I coach and work with business owners where, hey, this guy, he's willing to sell me his business. Like he's doing you a favor, right? He's the guy down the street. Maybe you know him. He's in the similar business. And people get real excited and that guy wants double what the business is really worth, right? But if you don't have 100 to choose from, you might get sucked into that deal and really buy something bad. I think of it like anything, whether it's dating or buying a home or whatever. If you've got 1,000 homes to choose from, it's totally different than if there's only one for sale in the neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
If you've got access to a ton of really great people to date, then it's much easier to be selective. And with businesses, it's the same thing. If you've got a system, and that's really what we like to see with finding, is you've got a system where you're methodically being able to see a lot of deals every week, every month, then you don't get stuck into the fact that, like, I only have 2 to choose from, so I guess I got to choose the best of the worst. You really want this to be a bit like a marriage, right? You're going to spend a lot of time here to where you pick exactly what you want, because you're going to be really invested in these things, even if it's just financially, and you get people to help you run most of it, and and don't have to put a ton of time into it. Eventually, there's going to be a significant investment. So
Exactly
it's worth putting yourself in the situation where you have options. If you find yourself thinking, I have to make this deal work, that is an immediate eject button for me. Right. And when I was flipping houses and I used to buy them, because it was a similar thing, as a real estate investor, I would always tell myself, the last thing I would say as I went into a negotiation is, I don't need this deal. Right. I had to go in there from a position of, this has to work for me and work well, or I'm just not in. Right?
Absolutely.
So anyway, so I know you were kind of emphasizing that, but I've seen this mistake even after people have heard it. They didn't hear it in their heart, and they get excited and they get emotional, and they don't stick to what they find is their target acquisition criteria. So, and I think that's why that document's going to be such a valuable tool for people to be really clear on what they want.
I think so too. And we're alluding to information that you might not have at the find stage yet as well, which is another reason why you need that volume. Because as you get through this deal process and get to know the business more, there are going to be more reasons why you shouldn't buy it than why you should. So by having that large volume, you really are giving yourself the opportunity to be able to filter out the bad deals and work with the sellers that you think are able to be flexible enough to give you the deal that you want, and also make sure that you're not buying something that is just going to be chaotic and really risky. And the worst situation you could get into is, you want the cash flow, and you either want that as part of your earnings so you can then invest it and grow it or improve your lifestyle, or to invest back in the business or another one of your businesses to be able to grow it. Now, if that financial headroom starts coming down, suddenly you're taking on more work and not getting any benefit from it. And you end up investing from your current business into the business you've acquired to be able to help it to grow. And that is not an uncommon situation. So volume is really important. And I think the other elements of this really are sort of things that we would identify as we get more understanding of, exactly what this sort of anatomy of a deal is as we move through it. So that's fine. Okay. Then we get into fund. Sorry, Derick, I think we're both doing it now. We get into fund. And, there are a number of different ways that you can fund businesses. And Derick and I have done a specific webinar on this previously. But I would recommend making sure that you've got somewhere between 10, 25% that you're able to raise funds for to put down as a deposit. Okay. But equally, you shouldn't be scared of looking at businesses of $1.5 million plus, because no one needs that level of cash to fund the deal. Most deals will not be funded 100% by cash. You have the option of looking at an SBA loan, which is a government-backed loan, which gives you the opportunity to buy a business and pay it back over 10 years, and ultimately the seller gets paid out up front. Okay. You have the optionality of deferring some of those payments until certain performance criteria can be met, or giving the opportunity to spread payments with the seller actually taking a note on it. So they're effectively loaning you the money to pay them back out of the future profits of the business, saving you the need to be able to invest up front. I always, whatever the deal is, I always look at it from a debt coverage ratio perspective, even if I'm not going to fund it with debt. It just gives me an indication of whether the profit of the business relative to the valuation feels about right. So if we take an average of a 9% interest, a 10-year repayment, and we look at the valuation and the EBITDA, we're very easy able to kind of get an understanding of the debt coverage ratio. And the debt coverage ratio will also tell us what we're repaying over those 10 years, but also based on the EBITDA, what remains is the financial headroom. So that gives me the opportunity to dip into that if the business isn't performing where it needs to. But also it gives me an indication of my future earnings and where I can reinvest in the business to be able to help it grow. So there are lots of different options in terms of funding deals. As we get into it, we can talk about consulting for equity, where you might say, look, I've got great ideas on how I can grow your business. Let's start off by giving me 25% and I'll work with you for a day a week and we can start to grow it with a means to moving towards an acquisition. That's something that we hear about quite often. And also, bringing in equity partners. So there will be people out there, particularly if you've got a good reputation in your industry and your own business has got a great track record, there'll be people out there that will say, well, hang on, if I invest 250,000 into this deal, I can see you delivering really great growth like you have in the past. So you're a good investment. My share value is going to increase over the next 5 years faster than if I put it into my investment fund or I put it into investing in properties. So, having an understanding of what you believe you can yield from an investment as you grow that business as well is a good way of giving yourself flexibility around funding.
Very good.
So the next area is checks. And, I don't mean due diligence. This is the conversation that you're having with the seller or the broker. So when people are selling businesses, it seems to be the considered route to contact a broker, and the broker will help you take it to market. They'll help you create an IM, which is an information memorandum, which is information relating to how your business runs, who works in the business, who your customers are, and your financials. And they will also help you source buyers. My experience with brokers is very mixed. As a buyer, I find them incredibly frustrating. As a seller, I feel very frustrated for the seller because I don't necessarily think they do a great job. It's like realtors. Some are brilliant, some aren't. But I actually find they bring friction into the conversation. So I look to try and get past the broker, particularly if I find they're resistant or they're not adding any value, to try and get into a conversation with the seller as quickly as possible. And then it's about rapport building. I want to understand the motivation. I want to understand the motives. I want to understand if they were staying in the business, what would they do to be able to grow it? What's their knowledge that I can glean that gives me some understanding of where the growth opportunity is? I also want to understand why it hasn't grown in the past as much as maybe I think the potential would allow it to. So it's really important to make sure that we do the right checks. So first of all, we want to understand that it's profitable and it can satisfy the requirements of an SBA loan in terms of debt coverage ratio. We want to make sure that the financials equate, accurately to market valuations, that we're not overpaying for it. We want to understand the quality of the team, the predictability of the revenue, and where we might be able to see opportunities to take cost out, further increasing the profitability in the future. And a lot of that might be duplication of assets and resources. So if I've got a finance department, I don't need two eventually. If I've got a sales department and we're selling the same products and services, I'm probably not going to need exactly the same size sales department in the acquired business. So the more we get an understanding of the company we're looking to acquire, we can make those calculations because we're good business people. We understand about resources and assets and how we leverage them to be able to create an outcome that's far greater than the sum of the individual parts. That's what we're trying to do. So it's an analysis phase, really, working with the seller, understanding those different forms of capital and how closely they align to the valuation that they put on the business, but also how we would leverage them, how we would operate that capital in a way that would deliver a much greater outcome, particularly integrated into our existing business.
Yeah. So to kind of summarize what I hear you saying here, Rob, is this is the high level check, right? Let's make sure the most important boxes are checked. And if they're not, we have a plan, and also us looking at it from an opportunistic standpoint and saying, are there things that I have access to that could increase the value of this business, right? Like you said, I've got a really great sales team. This business does the same thing as we do. My sales team, we don't need two sales teams. We only need one now. So that automatically increases profits because we don't need to double up on that cost, right? And so really being clear on where those opportunities are. But this, like you said, isn't the due diligence. This is the high level, once over, make sure these are checked, or if there are some red flags, this is where we identify them quickly so that we don't waste a bunch of time on something that doesn't even hit the high level marks. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. And something as simple as price increases. When did you last do a price increase?
Sure.
Yeah, it's the most predictable form of growth. So if they haven't had a price increase in the last 3 years, then that's something else that we can include in this kind of future framing of an EBITDA. So this is why sometimes for these deals, a CPA isn't necessarily going to be enough for you. You're going to want a CFO that can look at, a number of different items and be able to predict if we can shift that up, or we can shift that up, and we can save that cost. This is what the future profitability of that business would look like, the financial engineering. So it's really important. In the same way that if we renegotiate the debt and can get that debt at longer term, or we can reduce the interest rate, that'll have a fundamental impact on the availability of cash. So all of these things are really important. So I think validating the earnings that come from the business, not the revenue. So we're looking at the bottom line earnings when all costs are taken out, how much cash is remaining. That's really important. The second thing I'd look at is customer concentration. So again, the risk is if we lose that customer and it makes up 30% of the revenue and we apply that model, what does that then do to the profitability of the company? And realistically, how are we going to get it back? Then I think one of the other big problems is staff. So yes, there's a big thing around will staff behave themselves in terms of still being productive with you as the new owner, but most importantly, will they stay? So we want to make sure that the key people in the business and get reassurance that they're not going to leave. Ideally, tie them in. Sometimes we might even offer them performance bonuses or equity themselves to keep them in, because the cost of replacing them with recruitment, with upheaval to the business, inability to be able to meet demand, particularly if they're delivering something like a dentist, for instance. If there's a dentist as part of a practice that, effectively are making revenue when they're near the chair or when somebody's in the chair, then if they leave the business and we've got to then replace them and there's a 3-month lag, then we've lost 3 months revenue. So we need to really understand, kind of what the people relationship is to the sustainability and the stability of the future revenues of the business and incurring additional costs. So staff are a really big thing. And then legal and operational liabilities. So, have they got the right insurances? Have you indemnified yourself against outstanding lawsuits and cases? And if you're buying in the 1 to 3 million category, this is really risky, because if I'm making 200,000, it's not a huge amount of money. It's a good amount of money. But if I'm thinking, you know what, maybe I won't pay the insurance this year and I'll say 15,000. This happens 8 out of 10 times, Derick. You're looking at it and you're thinking, okay, license to operate. When did you last have a fire check, for instance? 3 years ago. Okay, should you be operating within the state legislation without having a fire check every 12 months? No. Why haven't they done it? Probably cost them $1,500 and is a bit of hassle to organise. But I see it. Reasons like that, they shouldn't even be operating. So we've got to be really careful. In some respects, it's easier to buy a much bigger business that has to be compliant, shareholders, etc., than an operator-owned business, because you're going to see all of these shortcuts. And also where the EBITDAs may be clouded by how they treat earnings and where they're buying things for themselves that they're actually being put against the business as well. So you've got to be really clear on how to separate those things. So checks as you said, Derick, you really, really need to know what to ask across each of those areas, and not just take the information memorandum or the broker's word at face value, because I wouldn't put a lot of trust in what brokers are doing, because they just want to get the deal over the line.
Right. So what I hear you saying is, of course, you can trust, but you need to verify, because a lot of times they're putting the best lighting on it and making everything look as pretty as they can. And you need to be aware of some of these common pitfalls, right? And really know what to look for. And here's the good news, Rob. We know that this isn't something that this is a skill set, right? There's a checklist, there's a way to go through this, there's a formula. This isn't something, like Rob said, that you need to figure out or even should try to figure out on the way, because when you're figuring things out on the way, you're learning by trial and error, which is literally the most expensive way to learn, is to make the mistake and realize you lose the key team member and you just lost 6 months worth of revenue. So that just cost you 200 grand in profit, right? And all of a sudden, getting good help from a consultant or a CPA or a CFO feels really cheap, because that's where the real value is making sure you don't make a mistake versus just trying to cut corners and save a couple $1,000 here or there.
Absolutely. And a lot of people, particularly if they're aware and paying attention, they'll see a term deal team, and that's absolutely right. Some sort of M&A advisory, CPA/CFO, even if you have a day with a CFO, it's worthwhile that they can then run the simulated models and the scenarios. It's so important to then inform the strategy post-close. So I would certainly have a CFO, even fractional, for a day to do a workshop with you to be able to model out what the future looks like, because it's not really a CPA's capability. And then third,
right,
the lawyer, because a good lawyer will help you assess risk. Now, if you listen to the lawyer, most deals aren't going to get done. Because there's always a level of risk that they'll either put provisions in place that are going to scare the seller, but at least you've got the background to be able to help make those decisions. And the M&A advisor will be able to give you some of the picture and the color and the experience and the nuance that says, yeah, don't do that, or it's going to kill the deal. And we really want it for these reasons. But I think it's not a kind of red line. I think it's something that we can work with. But definitely have a lawyer that can make sure that the right indemnities are in place, and that when you're managing cash transactions of that size, you've got to protect yourself legally, because some of these deals, people will take money, run off into the sunset, and not face any liability for misleading you or misrepresenting you in the sale. I've had that before, where people have misrepresented ownership, and it's got to a point where we've signed the LOI and we're in due diligence and financing's been arranged and we've incurred quite a lot of cost. And, oh, sorry, this is tied up now because there's a lien against the business from a previous partner. What do you do?
Right.
So
right.
You have to make sure you've got legal support to ensure it protects you from those sorts of situations.
Yep, absolutely. And like you said, I found that lawyers are never incentivized to say, yeah, go do that, right? Because then they're taking on all the liability. So they're always going to tell you why it doesn't work. But they do a really good job in pointing out all the danger points. And then you can determine if that's worth it to you, or what makes sense and what's worth fighting for and what you can live with, right? But they're really your point everything out, but not necessarily the one who gets to say whether you do the deal or not.
Absolutely. And another asset of having a CFO on the team is very much around working capital. So, if you're looking to do a share purchase, then you can't buy a business that doesn't have cash. So the amount of times the seller thinks they remove all of the cash in the bank, absolutely not. You sell a business cash-free, debt-free, but there needs to be a provision for working capital, because it's not a business without the working capital cycle that enables it to be able to operate. So a CFO will be able to take a look at 2 years' books and very quickly figure out what the working capital requirement is to leave in the business as well.
So a question on that, Rob, is that something that normally gets funded as part of the purchase through the SBA loan? Or is that something that an owner needs to be able to prepare to bring on themselves?
No, so I think so the working capital cycle needs to be addressed by the seller. So if there's cash, out of the cash in the bank, they need to make sure there is sufficient amount of money left to meet the working capital requirements. And as a rule of thumb, you might say 3 months worth of costs. That's too simplistic, but there is definitely going to be, the type of industry it is, the size of business, a requirement to leave as working capital provision.
Right. Okay. Very good.
Okay. So then we get into the close, and that's actually the transaction. So once we've gone through due diligence, we've agreed everything, then we either get into a share purchase agreement where we're buying equity in the company, 100% ownership, or it's an asset purchase agreement where we're buying the assets of the business that we then continue to run under our own brand. So, there will be a contract of, like say, whether it's an APA or whether it's an SPA, they will be delivered by the seller's lawyers, and all of that will then be signed off, and you take ownership of the business.
Very good. Anything else you want to cover there?
No, I think we're being being tricked by the slides again, Derick. Then once we've done the deal and we've closed that deal, we get into ownership. Okay, so the biggest thing with ownership, I think, is try and make sure that you do meet key people in the business before you take on ownership of the business. Too often that isn't managed properly, and that's where you will lose key people. So make sure that there is an understanding, there's a very clear timeline, there's a great communications plan, everybody understands the situation, what's happening, reassurances are made that you're not going to come in and sack everybody or change their working terms and conditions. So be really, really clear that it's important to be able to keep those people on board. There's a timeline for being able to transfer over the bank statements, make sure that all of the accesses to people's computers, it sounds so simple, but again, it's often overlooked that you get in there in day one, and you're like, well, how do I get into that folder? And again, if it's a business, if it's a business of that size, quite often there isn't a head of HR, a head of finance, a head of IT. It's the owner, and they've gone. And if they're not staying in the business to support you, that transition doesn't happen. So having checklists, and again, I can share my experience. So you've got a checklist of everything that needs to happen during that transition phase. So you've got full access to all of the cash, all of the files, all of the systems to be able to keep that business continuity.
So with a lot of these, Rob, I've definitely seen where part of the deal is the owner needs to stay on for 30, 60, 90 days to help smooth that transition. Could you give us your experience on how important that is, or isn't it? And I'm guessing some of that has to do just with preparation.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that can also affect the valuation. So if an owner is that distressed that they need to get themselves out straight away with no transition planning, I think is more risk. So I would look at putting in a lower offer in that situation. Having the owner on board, if it's managed properly, and like I said, you've got a really good transition plan, making sure there's clarity over each department, each area of the business on how we can kind of go from day 0 to day 90 is really important. And most deals will be done if the owner is staying, holding some of that back. It's not 100% cash at closing. In private equity, we normally look at 30% cash, 30% earn out. So they get paid once they've been in the business for a certain amount of time, it's stabilized and it's achieved its performance objectives, and 30% in share rollover. But if this is your first acquisition, that wouldn't be a consideration. So you might say, 70% cash and then 30% payable after 90 days, 180 days, 352 days, whatever it might be. So an earnout is something that's pretty common, where you won't pay the seller fully until they've delivered their obligations of making sure the smooth transition. But having a transition plan is essential. So, we have clear categories, we have clear timelines, we have a checklist of making sure that whatever handover needs to be done, whatever briefing, whatever kind of objective setting, it happens. But in those first 30 days, I think it's all about just observing, meeting people, listening, introducing, the friendly face. And then maybe after those 30 days, you know them. You've already got a rapport. They know you're a good guy. They know your obligations are honourable. So then it's about excite me with the vision. Get me excited. We know the reasons that you wanted to acquire the business, but now tell us what you think the possibilities are working with us. And what does that mean for us as employees? If we can grow the business, does that mean my salary is going to increase? Does it mean I'm going to get to work on more interesting projects? Do I trust you? Your vision. You're paying my mortgage. You're paying for me to go on holiday with my family. You're paying for me to be able to invest in savings that give me future security. So do I trust you not to drive this business into a cliff? So building the trust of the people in your plan and your strategy and vision is really important. So after those first 30 days, excite people and show them that there is some substance to what it is that you're trying to do. Then I would certainly be sitting down with the CFO and figuring out where might there be some quick wins where we can save costs through integration to be able to increase profitability. Where might we be able to start bringing people from the mothership, from our platform company, our original company, into this company to be able to educate them and implement our systems if we're better. If we bought this business for capability, it's the other way around. Where do we say, right, brilliant, we'd love you to come into the mothership now and talk us through how you implemented that or implement the performance management framework that you've put in. So it could work both ways, but we're starting to see this kind of cross-semination of key people between the two businesses to start to move forward with that integration. And then in weeks 9 to 12, maybe after the 90-day period, I would then go into a full kind of transition plan. Right, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to execute. It's a necessary part of this vision that we got you excited about. So it's good for you. Yes, we are going to be losing some people, but unfortunately, we have to kind of cut off the branches that are bearing no fruit to be able to go into our next phase of growth. So it's a kind of typical transition process if that's the strategy. But all of that comes into run. We want to make sure we've got good visibility and we're implementing best practice around financial controls, around people management, meeting our customers' expectations and achieving our sales and growth targets, as well as a separate work stream for transition.
I love it. Well, tons of information there, Rob, and I really appreciate you digging into that. I know that each one of those slides in and of itself, right, it could be hours and hours of content, but what we're really trying to do here is give you an understanding of there are checklists, there is a formula, there are things you need to watch for, and there is a process for doing this in a way that works consistently, because nothing's a guarantee, right, that it's going to work. But if we can do do this systematically and follow good checks and a good formula that works, there's a very high probability that we're going to find a good business. We're going to acquire a good business. We're going to be prepared for that. And then we're also going to be have a system for making that transition so that we can maintain profitability, keep the important components, whether those be people, systems, capabilities, customers, et cetera, in place. And all of that comes down to just understanding, what does this really look like, right? And I think that's really what we wanted to take the lid off of today, so you can at least look in and get a bird's eye view of, when we buy a box that's a business, what do we need to be looking at? How do we approach that? And how do we put that together? Now, of course, Rob, the first step in that is figuring out what kind of business do I want to buy. For some of you, that may be more or less obvious, but I think this is where we want to help you out. I promised you that we would let you have access to that tool. So let me just run over to the slide here where you can download this tool. So if you use the QR code here, or if you're not great with QR codes or you're already on your phone, right, you can go to biglifefinancial.com/AAA, Anatomy of an Acquisition, right? AAA-webinar. If you go there, you'll be able to get the tool and download it. It will take you through a checklist of how to determine what kind of business is right for you, what's the criteria, so that you can really understand why you're buying a business and how it's going to fit with what you want to build. Rob, I know you're a huge advocate of reverse engineering, right? So we got to figure out, what do you want, and then acquire businesses that are actually in that direction. Otherwise, we just get pulled in the wrong direction. And if you do that, Rob mentioned a couple of the other webinars that we've done, right? Like we talked about funding, and we did a whole webinar on how that works and the deal flow behind that. So we'll send you a link to that. We'll send you a link to some of the others that we've done, so that you can continue to learn about this in a way that's compelling and can be real world. And one of the things that we've strived to do with each of these webinars in this whole series is be honest with you and be realistic about what it takes, right? We don't do that to scare you off. We do that to prepare you, because this is something anybody who's run a business can do if it's the right fit for you. But it really helps to know what you're getting yourself into, right? When I was a real estate investor, I spent about a year and probably $60,000 or $70,000 to get up to speed so that I could start buying and flipping houses. But by the time I did one deal, I pretty much got my money back. And from there, I get to use that knowledge from there forward. So we're really doing our best to fill in the pieces for you. We're not going to sit down and spend 2 days on a webinar and I don't think anybody can do that much video. But if we can feed this to you over time, help you ingest it, come up with your questions, then we want to do that. Also, you'll have the opportunity when you download this to set an appointment with myself or Rob or someone on our team, so that you can, have a conversation, talk through what you're trying to do, and we can help offer suggestions. We may have some insights. We do have a group that teaches this. It's this banner behind me. We call it Build Wealth Your Way, or Wealth Your Way. And the whole idea there is how to build your business so that it's worth the maximum value. And then if you decide to go into mergers and acquisitions or buying businesses like we talked about today, you can do that. So it's really a powerful way to get access to high-level coaching at a very reasonable price. But the value is insane, right? Like, to work with someone like Rob, who's done over 30 of these big roll-ups, helped hundreds of people buy their first business, that's invaluable experience. So, if you're really looking for help along the way, that might be a solution for you down the road. And we'd love to bring you in. All it takes is not making one mistake in your current business, or not buying the wrong business to pay for that tenfold. So, if that turns out to be the right choice, we'd love to have that conversation too. And as a bare minimum, if there's something or a question that came up in this and you can't figure out the answer, reply to our emails. Let us know. We would be happy to help you get some answers, or set up a call from that to talk you through this. This isn't some arm's length thing where we're just saying, hey, you're on your own, go do your thing. We put together 5 modules in a work course. This is us really doing our best to help you figure out the solutions and start acquiring businesses if that's the path you want to go down. So anything you want to add to that, Rob?
I would add that you're on that intention phase now. Yeah, you're scheduling time to seek more information. So I think the next phase of that is certainly complete the form. And then, if you are at a point where you're thinking, okay, I think mergers and acquisitions is a vehicle that can help me build wealth, grow my business, create a legacy, have a level of freedom in my life, or you're just excited about doing something new and accomplishing something exciting, then, move into the focus stage and get on a call with us, talk about your ideas, share the completed document, and then we can help you charter exactly what that pathway looks like. And, as you mentioned, Derick, the Wealth Your Way program is a really good way of being able to kind of work through into focus and action on your own, but knowing that you've got that insurance policy of me and Derick and the rest of the team behind you that have experience in this and will be able to guide and advise you as to what the right steps are, how to make sure you're sourcing the right businesses, where you can source them from, how to set up really effective checking mechanisms early on to minimize the amount of time. But yeah, ultimately getting a $650,000 a year cash flow for a couple of acquisitions over 12 months, like the 2 projects I mentioned, it's in your hands. It's out there. There's nothing unique or special about the people I'm working with other than the fact they're focused, they're ambitious, and they've done a good job of building a platform business, and they just wanted to add to it.
Yeah. And we've got a bunch of other people in the group who are adding second locations, putting out letters of intent. They're working through this process. The group's relatively new, but I've been amazed at how quickly people are progressing through it because they're getting the answers they need. They know they have the support. So it's really fun. And, I've talked about this before, but the trajectory of your life, where you go with your life, has so much to do with the conversations you're in, right? And this is one of those things, like you being here, you're in a conversation. Being part of a group like this, you're in a conversation. Watching the other webinars, you're in a conversation. These conversations change and stretch your mind and how you see the world. And once it's been stretched, it never goes back to the same shape, right? You never see things the same. And so whether you're ready to, to take that big step forward or just a small one, stay in the conversation. If this is something you want to do, even if it's a little scary right now, continue to learn, continue to grow, because I promise you the path forward is there, right? And it might just take a little bit of time for you to for the fog to clear a little bit so you can go a little faster, and then it clears a little more, you can go a little faster, but stay on that trajectory. If this is a direction you want to go, and I think for a lot of you who have a business and can really see the power of buying capabilities instead of having to build every single bit of it brick by brick, this is a huge opportunity. So I know we're kind of at the top of the hour here, so I just want to thank all of you for being here. Watch for if you haven't downloaded it yet, download the tool. B, set up a call with myself, Rob, or someone on the team. And C, watch for the emails with additional webinars so you can continue to get this knowledge, get it more in depth in bite-sized chunks. And we're excited. So let us know. Don't be afraid to reply to the emails. Let us know how we can support you. We're real people. We're really here to make this happen for you. And thankfully, we've got someone like Rob on the team who's done this hundreds of times. So you're really in the presence of some people who know what they can do. So with all of that, I appreciate you guys being here. If you need anything, let us know. Otherwise, keep your eyes peeled. We've got more of these coming up, and we will continue to provide support and education so you guys can progress down the road. So thanks for being here, Rob. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Derick, and thank you, everyone, for attending.
All right. We'll see you guys on the next one.